Welcome to today's Firm of the Future webinar. We are going to be talking about find and focusing on your niche. It's one of the topics that's near and dear to my heart. I've actually been on the road and been talking about this quite a bit. We're going to talk about the various different reasons for it, but again, if you're looking to lower your costs and increase your revenue or your profitability per client, this is something that's really, really critical for your practice. We'll get to this. This is, again, part of Intuit's Firm of the Future. It's brought to you by Intuit. If you haven't checked it out, go to qbointuit.com if you're not using QBO. I'm from Karbon. I'll get a little bit about that, but you can learn about us at karbonhq.com. This is part of our June webinar and article series strictly around business strategy. You will see on firmofthefuture.com, if you go there, you'll see the various different articles coming up over the next week or the next 2 weeks on embracing change across your firm, scaling your business, the why, what, and how, and then organizational design of modern practice. We actually taped that webinar just a short bit ago. So all of those will be up on firmofthefuture.com either this week or in the next week or two. Find and focus on your niche is what we're talking about today. And again, for those of you that are listening to this on tape, you've obviously already gone to the Firm of the Future site to do that. If you want to learn about other events, you can go to karbonhq.com events as well. And we have other events that are tied to the business strategy theme as well. Now, before we get started, a couple of tips and tricks and some things to know. First is if you're new to GoToWebinar, you use that orange button there to expand or collapse that. We will have my coworker Andy on the line as well. She is helping to answer questions as I go through the webinar. I will try to answer some as we go, though my multitasking skills are not that useful or not helpful, and so I will be addressing most of those questions at the end. If you have anything like Skype or other applications that are taking up a lot of bandwidth, slow them down or just turn them off, I'm sorry, so that ultimately I don't sound like a robot and your connection is really good. For those of you that want CPE credits, yes, there are CPE credits to be had today. We are going to have a special keyword that you will see somewhere through the presentation today, and then I will ask you a question at the end to be able to recite that keyword. So again, those of you who are looking for CPA credits, look for that keyword on the slides. So moving forward, who is the person speaking to you today? My name is Ian Vason. I'm co-founder and vice president of product marketing at Karbon. My email is there, as well as you can check out the Karbon site. You can email me after the webinar at any time if you have questions regarding the content or some thoughts. Happy to answer them. I have been a part of Karbon for the last year or so. Karbon's been around for the last 2 years, but I've worked inside in the accounting industry for well over 15 years, in tech for well over 25. 10 of those years were at Intuit, where I used to lead the QuickBooks Pro Advisor program and various other product divisions at Intuit. So I'm familiar with the topic. I also, in terms of this particular topic in general, I have a master's in business management. I have another master's in engineering management, but I spent some time focusing on this in my past. So I've got a little bit of understanding of it overall. If you're interested about Karbon, we're not going to be talking about Karbon or a demo, but it is task management for accountants. You can go to karbonhq.com. Karbon is the place for you to bring your email together to ultimately collaborate on the work, bring the work into one view, which is led by and processed through checklists, which ultimately creates tasks for you so you can prioritize your day, and it brings all your team into one place so you get visibility across everything that's happening in your firm. If you're interested, go to karbonhq.com to learn more, and if you need a demo, go to karbonhq.com/events. So let's move straight into find and focus on your niche. And any good presentation that's going to talk about a marketing topic cannot be done without having a Philip Kotler quote. Actually, was a professor of mine at Kellogg. Typically thought of as the godfather of marketing, so I put a few in here just to appease all of you marketers out there. And the most important thing is for Kotler to bring up here is to forecast where your customers are going and be at that point. You want to know what your target is today, but you also want to know how that target is changing over time, and we're going to discuss that in a little bit. Second quote is, your company does not belong in markets where it cannot be the best. There's a bunch of truth to that. Your best can be measured on different ways. If you're not happy or you're not satisfied or motivated by the customers that you serve, it translates in the work that you do. But also, your best assets, your best capabilities must coincide with the target market that you're trying to actually be able to attract, but also be able to serve. The third thing is, it's more important to do what's strategically right than it was immediately profitable. When you make short-term decisions, and again, this is a good lesson learned for when you first start your business. For those of you that are in your accounting practices at this point, you ultimately take anybody that comes in through the front door. And what happens is you ultimately are sacrificing profitability. There's a necessity by doing it, but over time you ultimately then have to become more and more narrow focused so that you can ultimately get better profit, more revenue per client that comes in that respects the expertise that you have, and that ultimately feeds on itself so that you're able to be more and more focused, delivering more and more value, which inherently gives you more value in terms of the fees that you're able to charge. So that is my quick little primer on quotes from Philip Kotler. I want to go through a little bit of an importance of a niche and why to focus on that. I do feel like this has become a bit of a buzzword over the last year, but I assure you it is not a buzzword, but in actuality a very, very, very important factor to take into account on what you're doing and how you're doing it. So I'll articulate that here in this next quick section. So I've been around the country for the last almost a year now, and I've been meeting with folks around what their barriers are and what they're facing and their struggles to ultimately grow. And growth could be in terms of getting additional clients. It could be in terms of raising profitability per client, how to upsell, how to cross-sell. And it could be also in terms of how do you free up more time in the day to do what you want. And this was the list of the top 10 things that people had articulated in order about what their barriers were. One of the interesting things here is when you are targeting on a smaller set of customers, when you have a niche focus, you can impact 8 of the 10 different barriers that people are struggling with. Everything from talent, being able to attract the right talent, to value pricing, making it simpler and easier, to the technology you need to serve, and to the processes by which your business is going to operate. Again, all of these 8 are impacted by having a narrower focus and more of a concerted effort on what you do. Now, what I mean by that is a little bit of why a niche is important. I'm going to go through an example that brings it to life here in a short second. But it's a good little quote out there, or a good little statement, which is, you can be the jack of all trades and the master of none. And what happens is when you're doing that, and again, a lot of folks face this when they're first starting out because you just don't have the same sort of flexibility to go on a narrow focus when you have nobody to serve currently. But by trying to serve everyone and doing everything for everyone, you really start to stretch your resources. And unfortunately, we all only have a limited amount of resources, and that includes your time, your capital, your emotional energy, and everything else. And so the more broad of a net that you cast, the harder it is for you to be able to leverage economies of scale and to be able to ultimately provide better and higher quality and dedicated service. Because there's just so many things that you have to take into account and so many things that are going to be pressing against your time and your money and your focus. And so what I mean by that is on the bottom pieces here, that when you're specialized, it ultimately provides these different pieces of success. So for instance, when you're passionate about the things that you do, so all of you, I can tell you, if you thought and sat back, and again, a great exercise for your staff, but if you ask them who are the clients that you would want to get rid of, they immediately come to the top of your head. And when you think about which are my best clients, you gravitate to a few, and generally the clients that are the best are ones that you have alignment with in terms of what they're doing and the passion that you have inherently with your business. And that ultimately leads to higher job satisfaction and translates directly into better client service. The biggest thing here is, again, the impact on both the top line and the bottom line. When you are specialized, your sales and marketing efforts become much more honed and focused. It's easier for you to do communication with those folks. It's less costly to be able to create the materials. And again, you're always wanting to do them in the customer voice. So the broader the customers you serve, either the more genericized the voice is, or the more materials you have to generate that are actually specific to that particular audience. And materials can be web assets, they can be print assets, they can just be in terms of social articulation. But again, you're most effective in actually selling and closing deals when you're actually being able to communicate and have expertise in the subject matter that you're talking to. So that's, again, why the sales and marketing provides a better ROI. On the actual cost side of the equation, the more similar your clients are, the more repeatable your processes are. And so if you want to free up capacity, if you want to be able to get more value per client, it's about reducing costs. And those costs are reduced by the ability to serve in a repeatable fashion. And so I'm on a huge bent, and I think a lot of folks that are doing really, really well in market these days have a phenomenal processes and phenomenal visibility and consistency across what they do and who they serve. And so that similar clients reduces the amount of work in order to make sure that those processes can span a larger or go across a larger base of customers that are different. So that leads directly into standardized processes, which I've already kind of mentioned, and that, by having those standardized processes, your service quality is going to increase because you have less variance to deal with, and it ultimately drives down lower cost. That also helps you in terms of recruitment. When you are doing things more repeatable, you're doing them in a more focused manner, it's easier for you to be able to train people coming in, so you could get more junior people, but it also attracts more specialized folks who actually do that type of work in a more specific fashion to have more likelihood to be able to come on board. And lastly, it all comes down to expertise. The more and more that you become a knowledge expert in a given domain, the higher there is a willingness for those folks to pay for those services. It comes down to when most people, when they're looking for someone to be their trusted advisor, they want the best in the business. Now the question is whether or not they can afford that. And so that changes, again, who they can select and how they can select them. But you, as a practitioner, the more and more expertise you have gives you flexibility in terms of what you're going to charge and how you're going to charge, and who you can attract and who you can turn away. And so that expertise provides you more flexibility and more capability going forward. So I want to culminate this to an example. So it's directly related to an Intuit example when I worked there. And it's happened various times through the years, but I'm going to go back in time to roughly 2006 or so. And so we were doing a lot of work with Apple directly at the time. And one of the initiatives that we put in place was we were pairing QuickBooks Pro advisors directly with Apple stores and local geographies. And what we were doing is, inside of every Apple store, there is a small business consultant. And that person's job is to ultimately help business owners as they come in to ultimately find the right machine that they would need to use and get them going in terms of being able to have the hardware and ultimately part of the software set up so that they could be able to move their business forward and use it as a platform to deliver. But the issue was these small business consultants aren't too knowledgeable beyond the products and the hardware that Apple sold. And so at that day and age, if you were a creative, if you were a designer, an architect, any of those sort of standards, professional service types that have more creative bents, problem-solving sort of capabilities, you ultimately idolized Apple overall. And when you started your business, you would ultimately go to the Apple store to collect your first most important thing when you left your big corporation and now we're starting on your own, which was to get your shiny new Mac laptop. There was nothing more satisfying for these folks than to go in there and configure a laptop, because that really set them apart and determined that they actually had a business and they were moving forward. Now the issue was as soon as they set up the laptop, they would turn to the small business consultant and say, well, where do I go from here? I am trying to do work for so-and-so. I ultimately need to invoice them. What do I do and what software do I use? And the small business consultant would typically be confused and wouldn't know what to pick at, and so they would just point them towards the software wall. So we brought a lot of QuickBooks Pro advisors in to work directly with the small business consultants. And there was a mixture of success that existed. Those who actually were ultimately focused on the creatives overall did really well. And those who were broader in nature and weren't really focused on the audience didn't do so well. And the reason for that was the small business consultant would be able to have a conversation with the actual QuickBooks Pro advisor, and they became top of mind. And if that small business consultant felt like they understood the audience that they were mutually trying to serve, they were more likely to recommend that person over to the small businesses that came in outside of the webinars and the seminars that were being conducted at the store. And so what was happening was when someone would come in the door and they would ask the small business consultant, that small business consultant would say, I actually don't have the answer for you, but I know that they're using QuickBooks, and here's a person who I can refer you to that ultimately can help you get you going. Because there was confidence in the referral, and ultimately that person was coming back on a frequent basis, talking to that small business consultant and nurturing that relationship. And so the takeaway here was those who were focused on that particular audience, that could speak to their language and could provide good outcomes that ultimately drove into referrals, found a way to be able to market themselves that cost them nothing but literally showing up to the Apple Store once a week and having a conversation with that small business consultant. Maybe also doing a seminar maybe once a month, which may have been an hour of their time. But their marketing costs were literally just the time that they spent doing that. And so it's an unlikely scenario about how to ultimately capture customers by understanding the life cycle and the journey that they go on, and being at a critical moment within that small business's formation or the actual movement thereof forward to where they're going to need the trusted advisor. And so the reason for having and finding a niche and knowing where to actually look is so that you can take a smaller look or a more narrow look at the customers or clients that you want to serve and be able to understand the life cycle that they go on and map out where are the places that I can be able to be in the conversation where someone may not see the obvious connection. Now, there's limitations to this. If you're serving manufacturing, or let's say home remodeling clients, and maybe some commercial real estate folks, going to a Home Depot and talking to cashiers there is not going to be your answer. But possibly you may determine that the local renovation shows that happen are a good place to go. So again, understand the audience and where they shop, what they do, what they read, where they get their advice. Being able to understand that, and again, you can't do that with a really broad mix, allows you to understand where you should best place yourself and how you can go ahead and both attract them, but also retain them. And so again, that's a little bit of an example to bring up. Now, I want to go through a little bit of marketing theory, not because I was doing quotes before, but it also it helps you understand where finding and focusing on the niche will ultimately bear you fruit and how it fits within the entire pipeline of strategy and marketing overall. And then I'm going to go into how to actually do the targeting itself in 5 steps right after this. So I want to go into this real quick, and then we're going to spend a bulk of the time really on just being able to understand how to find what your particular focus should be. So my first theoretical piece I want to bring up is what's called the 3 C's. And again, this goes back to strategically how do you position your firm and knowing where to focus overall. And how it's defined is there's this image here that I've picked up and placed in this slide for you. But there's 3 different ways, there's 3 different C's that exist. There's the competitors in market, there's the customers that you want to attract, and then there's your company overall. And the intersection of those, of what your company does well, the separation from the competitors that you have in market, and then ultimately the customers that you want to serve, is where you should have your narrow focus at. Now, any given firm can have really 3 different ways that they can differentiate themselves. They can differentiate themselves on price, which again a lot of in our industry do, which is a race to the bottom, and I strongly encourage you not to do that. And then the other 2 metrics are really you can actually differentiate yourself as an innovator or in terms of customer service. Now what's interesting is I think everybody out there claims to have the best customer service, and I'm sure everybody on this webinar does. And it is a bit of a requirement for what we do in this industry. But innovation is the other area that you could go down. And so examples would be Walmart would be the low-cost leader, Apple would be the leader of innovation, and let's say USAA Bank would be the highest in customer service. And so you need to figure out which one of those 3 pillars is going to be your focus point, because a lot of what you're going to do is stemming out of that in terms of strategically how you're going to both serve people but also attract people overall. The next particular framework to think about is what's called the SWOT analysis, and most of you are probably pretty familiar with this, but this is taking a look at your business overall and how it stands not from an outside-in perspective, from an inside-out. And there's really 4 different metrics on there. There's your strengths, which is internally looking at and how you ultimately are able to stand above others and how you're able to deliver the best to customers and clients out there. The next side of that, the inward looking, is your weaknesses, what you're not able to do well. And on the external looking out sort of side is what are the opportunities that are existing for you in the market that you're in. That could be a local market. That could be broader than that. And what are the threats to that market? How is that market changing over time so you know how to actually be able to change yourself within that context. And so a SWOT analysis is something is quite good to do once a year. And what it does is it opens up your eyes to understand what customers you may not be good for and what customers you may have a great ability to be able to serve. And then to see whether or not there are enough customers in the market for you to be able to attract or to be able to try to sell to, and whether that market is changing on you over time so that you might have to migrate your target focus on a progressive fashion. So the SWOT analysis is helping to understand the changing landscape that you operate in. The next one is the most important of these, which is called STP. And this is where a lot of what we do with finding and focusing is where we spend the effort on. And what that particular acronym stands for is segmentation, targeting, and positioning. And the reason for this is when you are more focused on a market, it's all about the message. It's all about how you're communicating to that audience. When you take a very generic message and try to sell to somebody and try to have them you trying to be the trusted advisor with them, it falls flat. You need to understand their language. You need to construct and this all comes down to the value conversation. So for those of you that are trying to make the leap to value pricing or fixed fee billing, that value conversation is where all of the value is determined and what someone's going to pay for the expectation of what you're going to deliver and what level of competency you can deliver it at. And so this is about understanding the market overall, understanding the segments of those markets that you can go on, and this is what we're going to be stepping in the 5 steps, determining which ones those are the right ones for you, and then going on the back end of this and understanding how to target it, how to speak to that audience, and then ultimately how to market it in sales and close. And so the STP model is the key model within focusing on a niche and being able to take that to the next level. And then these usually wrapped up in this last one, which I'm not going to spend time on, which is called the 4 Ps. This is your execution and your delivery. This is when you get through that value conversation, explaining what you're doing and how you're doing it. And there's really 4 components to it. It's really what is your product. So this is what is the services that you offer. What's your price? Again, it could be hourly, but hopefully you're doing something like fixed fees or value pricing. How are you, where are you placing yourself at? So what's your distribution around that? Where are you trying to intercept your customers? How are you trying to do your marketing? And then how you do your marketing, which is really on the promotional piece. So there's the where and the how. So this slide, what does all this mean? Why in the heck did we just go through that? Good thing you asked that. So here are the 4 models again, and this is how it breaks down. You start from the 3 Cs to understand how you want to be strategic with your business overall. You then do that SWOT analysis so you can understand yourself and understand the market that you want to operate in, or the basic client's broader spectrum, to be able to get a sense of where you want to focus and narrow down. The segmentation, targeting, positioning is all geared around being able to carve a message that's very specific to the audience that you've chosen that you want to serve. So that is the outcome and the next step of what we're going to be doing after you figure out your particular niche. And then the last one is really how you're going to address your clients and be able to deliver that and be able to get them not only across the line, but to serve them at the end of the day. So that is a bunch of the preliminary discussion. Let's get into the meat of it. But this is a perfect time for us to have the CPE keyword, as we're almost halfway through today's webinar, which is hippopotamus. The CPE keyword today is hippopotamus. You will not be in a spelling test to be able to spell hippopotamus. It will be on a self-selection, so don't worry about the spelling, but just remember that today's keyword is hippopotamus. So with all that being said, how in the heck do we determine which place that we want to focus on? What underlying clients do we want to target and work on and be able to spend our effort and our hard money to be able to attract and be able to get across the line? Step 1 is actually the simplest of the steps. So we're going to look at this at different perspectives to be able to ladder in from multiple different vantage points to where you should be focusing your efforts. And the first one is really discover your passion. Go grab a glass of wine. or the bottle. I'm not one to judge. And take a step back from your business and from things in general and just start to think about what is it about what you do and who you serve makes you get up each day. It's as simple as that. It's hard to do, but it's as simple as which clients, when I look at them, that when they call, I get excited about the phone call. Which ones, when I actually dive into the work, I'm looking at the work in a different way, and I'm trying to think beyond the scope of the work to be able to think about how I better can serve their business. Which ones of those clients, again, might be for your staff, do they talk positively about, and that they seem to have good things to say? It's those particular client opportunities and those particular projects that lead you down to understand whether or not there's similarity in the experiences that you're having across those clients, to understand whether or not that is where your focus already lies. Now, there could be some folk, there might be some of those clients might be because they're the easiest one, they're most profitable. So the question is really, is that something that's repeatable? But again, you always want to start from where you already gravitate towards and understand whether or not that particular, if there actually is a target there, or maybe it's a way of delivering. And so that is step one on the process. Step two is looking at it from a more quantitative approach and understanding what your customers might think of you. Because while you may be passionate about something, your customers can understand your passion based on the outcomes that you're delivering for them. And the best way to be able to get that is by doing a Net Promoter Survey. You should be asking all of your clients at the end of any given project, or if you're doing it on an ongoing basis, maybe on a quarterly review, this specific question at the bottom, which is the Net Promoter question. How likely is it that you would recommend our company to a friend or colleague? Now, that question could be followed by several other questions trying to drill into the details. Can you tell us why you gave it that ranking? What about what we do ultimately drove the ranking that you gave? But when somebody answers that question, and it's on a 0 to 10 scale, you're able then to understand who are the people who are super excited about you, aka the promoters, versus those people who are not at all satisfied about you, which is the detractors. And by doing that, you can create a score to see how you're doing and how that translates over time. However, in the exercise, what we're doing here, you're using the Net Promoter to figure out who are your promoters. Because those promoters, you want to find what are the similarities that exist within those. Because those are the ones that seem to love what you do and are probably having a higher willingness to pay and might pay more to continue to work for you in the future. And so being able to identify them in this manner allows you to follow up with them and have some conversations that might open up your eyes to the similarities that may or may not exist there. And so this is another exercise in terms of how to manage your clients overall, in terms of making sure that you mitigate the bad things that happen and ultimately driving more promoters. But for today's discussion, I just want to focus on that bit about leveraging those promoters to give you some insights. Now, the next way to go is if you have those particular customers identified, you're looking again for those vectors of similarity. Again, I use big words there, but basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to understand, what sort of ways do these people possibly operate. The easiest one and the one that everyone always gravitates towards is, well, what industry are they in? Are they all e-commerce? Are they all retail? Are they inventory? Do they have inventory needs and therefore they're producing products, manufacturing, distribution? Are they lawyers, chiropractors, dentists? I don't know, but those are some of the industry-related ones, and those are the classic ones that people talk about. If you need a list of the industry or verticals, feel free to email me. I'm happy to provide them. There are also the census. You can go look at the census, and there's, I think, 32 categorized on the census. And so that might give you a good indication. And most of you, if you do have a sort of a grouping of them, you know roughly what they do and who they serve and how they serve them. Another one that a lot of people use, which is pretty typical, is the size of the company. And that size can be measured in a couple of different ways. One is the number of employees. Typically, a company that has one person or just an owner is going to look and operate different than one that's got 2 to 5 employees, and 6 to 10, or it's actually 6 to 12, 12 to 20, 21, 20 to 100, and 100 plus. Each one of those companies has very different needs, has different levels of complexity, and has different requirements for the services that you offer. And so the employee headcount can be a good indication. Another one is the revenue size. whether you're serving people who are making $1,000 or less, or 100,000 to 500,000, 500,000 to a million, million to 5 million, and so forth. I hear a lot of folks who are very focused on have a particular niche. They will recite the exact revenue amount because the revenue really determines the level of the systems and the complexity in the business, the type of advice that they need, the type of analysis that you have to perform, and those types of things. Now, the other ones, again, are a little bit different ways of looking at it that are non-traditional. What are the type of services that you provide? Bookkeeping, accounting, payroll, advisory, audit, IT consulting, tax, whatever it might be, and then maybe some subcomponents of that might be more interesting. Another one is business complexity, because business complexity determines the type of, there's different types of people that can serve different types of complexity within businesses, and that could be a subset of maybe an industry or something else. Geography, where the hell are they located? Maybe you only focus on a local market. Maybe you focus on the folks in the northern part of your city versus the southern. I don't know. Maybe you're actually working with import-export businesses, so you're really doing well with folks that are based out of Australia that are doing work here in the States, and you do a lot of tax work with them because of the complexity of it. The savviness of the business owner. Again, in small businesses, the owners ultimately drive the behavior of the firm overall, and so knowing the savviness of the owner, for instance, or some of the capabilities of that, you might see similar patterns, and that's where, again, you're getting better outcomes because you can relate better with the owner of the business overall. Life stage of the business. Are they just starting out? Are they a startup? Are they growing heavily? Are they becoming more mature? Are they basically going out of business, or there's a succession plan? And the last thing was, again, more on that tech savviness, but what does the owner exude in the behaviors that they have? Again, these are all different ways to look at it much, in non-classical terms to figure out whether or not, or there is going to always be similarity. The question is which one of these is that similarity going to lie on? Okay? That's going to lead to your step 4, which is really consolidating those similarities, looking at those different vectors that exist, is trying to understand whether or not you compare them together and whether or not there really is a correlation that exists there. And at this point, on this step, I just want someone to be able to try to craft together where they think those similarities exist, and what we want to do is try to create these segments. And so maybe you're pairing together the industry with the tech savviness, and that is one segment that you'd articulate. Maybe you're going to be taking an owner characteristic and putting it with the size of the company, and that might be another segment that you look at. And so you're trying to carve together these different underlying segments that are able to articulate the type of businesses that you're serving or you don't want to serve. And we're doing this just as a preliminary in terms of just trying to use our gut to be our guide, because on step 5 is where I want to take a scientific approach to that. And we'll step into that right now. So again, step 1 through 4 is to use more of a qualitative approach, using your gut, using NPS, which is a bit scientific, to give you an idea of the customers to look at, and then ultimately being able to group that together by what you can see in terms of similarities. Now I want to take those steps and that preliminary idea of what you have in terms of who might be your target and actually use a more quantitative approach to help make some sense of what may seem like a hard exercise to do. And so this is how you can do it in a more scientific approach. So the first step of this is to take and determine the 10 to 12 different ways that you might measure or evaluate each one of your clients in terms of their importance to you or their ability to be a good customer of yours. And so this is determining, what are the different factors of evaluation that you want to have. I've put a few of them up there already. The amount of fees that they could be paying. So the willingness to pay is one, but the amount of fees that could possibly be collected from them. Maybe it's fitting with the passion that you have. Maybe it's that business sits within a larger market. So how big is the market in relation to the customer or the client that you're trying to serve? What is the complexity of the business overall? Again, there are different variables that you can choose that you can evaluate your clients all together and be able to understand whether it's good or it's bad, if it's important to you or not. because we're going to use that sort of measurement scale in order to get some more scientific evaluation. Then what you're going to do is, before you actually look at the details, you're going to take those 12 criteria evaluation, and you're going to choose out of that which 5. You don't necessarily want to go higher than that. You could go up to maybe 7, but what are the 5 of those that you really think have the most importance to you? And so you've done this sort of broad this broad brain dump of, here's the 10 or 12 things that I think I could measure a company on, and now you're going to pick out 5 of those that you think are really important to you. And then you're going to weight each one of those. You know what's called a 100-point exercise. You get 100 points. You've got the 5 different criteria that you're going to use to evaluate, and you're going to apply those 100 points across that. So maybe passion fit is my most important, and I'm going to give it 40 points. Then maybe willingness to pay is my second most important. I'm going to give it 30 points. Maybe the size of the market that it sits in is the third. I'm going to give it 20 points, and whatever that last criteria is, 10. And the reason for we're doing this is we're creating a weighting mathematical formula that we can use after we've done the evaluation of the clients that we have. So now what you're going to do is you're going to take every client. Or you could take the top 20%, depending how big your client list is going to be, and you're going to list them all down. Again, I'm going to show you, it looks like this. You're going to create a spreadsheet like this. I'm happy to pass this spreadsheet to you. I've got one that's templated that you can copy and leverage on your own. And what you're going to do is you're going to take and list each one of those clients, and you're going to look at client A, and you're going to say, client A, you're going to put the image of that client in your head, and you're going to ask yourself, on criteria number 1, passion fit, how well do they fit what I believe that passion fit criteria is? Are they not at all? And I'm going to give them a score of 1. Or are they a perfect fit, and I wish every single client was like this one because that's where I want to spend my time, and I give it a score of 5. And so in each one of these now, you're going to score them on a 1 to 5 scale. 1 being it's not a fit at all, 5 being it's a perfect fit. And you're going to continue to do that. So you're going to do that for client A, passion fit, I give it a 5. On willingness to pay, they're kind of cheap, and I seem to be fighting with them all the time to get the fees that I think that I deserve. I'm going to give them a 2. How big is the market that they're in? Well, these guys are in e-commerce. It's a huge market right now, but probably not the biggest out there. I'll give it a 4. And then I'll do the last criteria, maybe give it a 3. Now I'm done with client A, and I move on to client B, and I do the same thing. Client B, how big is the fashion fit? I hate these guys. They seem to, they always irritate the crap out of me, and nobody wants to work with them, so I give them a 1. Willingness to pay, they actually pay really, really well, though, which is why we keep them around. Give them a 5. How big is the market that they're in? It's pretty big. I'll give it a 4. You get the idea, and you do this across every single one of your clients. Now, what you've now done is you've created a quantitative view of your clients, and you're just going to do the math. Because now you've got your criteria across the top, and each one of them is weighted 40 points, 30 points, 20 points, 10 points. And now you've got each one of you've got your criteria, and they're weighted on a 1 to 5 scale. You just multiply the 1 times the 40. You then add that to the next one, which is, I think it was 4 times 30, and it creates a composite score for you. That's going to be somewhere between 1 to 5. And now you've got a rough idea of exactly which customers fit the ideal customer that you want to have, and you just sort the list to figure out which ones are at the top, which ones are the closest to 5, versus which ones are the closest to 1. And you now can take the 20%, so do the Pareto rule, you take the 20% of those at the top, and you start to go back and determine what is the similarity, looking across these different things. You've got this now scientific approach to now start to do the detection work on which ones pop to the top and why do they pop to the top. And that creates another viewpoint versus the qualitative one we just did. We've now got a quantitative approach, and we can see now how those two actually marry to one another so that we can feel confident that we're working on the right set. And so that then leads to your picking of the segment that seems to fit best for what you do. And that's where you get to marry the passion with the net promoter with the actual data that you have. Because again, you don't have a full amount of data to work from. This spreadsheet is the one I use to prioritize. Again, you can list the metrics across the top. You can then put your weighting percentage there on the bottom. Again, there's 2 different ways you can do it. You could actually have a hard quantitative metric that actually gives you something that's actually got some data on. I don't recommend that here. I use this for other things as well. What I talked about with that 1 to 5 scale is what's called a Harvey Ball scale, if you're at all curious. This is stemmed from if you ever go to like a Consumer Reports and you're trying to look for a new car and they always have these circles and one's black and one's red and some of them are half filled. That is a Harvey Ball analysis, and that's what you're actually doing here. So that is ultimately how you're able to get to a point where you can get some understanding of ultimately the niche that you're trying to serve and how you're trying to serve them. So let's go back and take a look at that and what I meant by that. So again, there's really 5 steps to this. The first one is using your passion, using what you inherently believe and where your immediate gravitation is, using your gut, your initial instincts on which clients and why, and what about those clients seems interesting. The step 2 on this is going to be, well, ultimately, which of these clients am I ultimately satisfied with, or which of the clients I have are satisfied with me, and that's using Net Promoter Score. If you want to understand more about Net Promoter, by the way, you can go to firmofthefuture.com, and there is an article up there that talks about Net Promoter specifically, and it'll go into more detail on when and how to do that. Step 3 is really the one that you're coming back to time and time again, which is the understanding of how are your customers going to be similar in nature, and understanding the different types of similarity that may exist to ultimately combine that into a proper segment that you can use to focus on and create a profile of the type of client that you want to actually speak to, attract, create marketing materials for, and ultimately the processes that you need to use to serve them. Fourth one is a consolidation of that. So the first one is using steps 1 and 2 to actually do the grouping. But then when you're doing step 5, which in this case was doing more the quantitative piece, that's using that quantitative perspective to actually be able to do the same steps 3 and 4 again to ultimately use those 2 analyses together to choose your niche on step 5. So with that, what I want to do here is quickly take a look at the questions that I haven't yet. I just want to make sure that nothing's been unaddressed that's going on here, and it hasn't, so that's good. So what I want to do is we're going to go a little bit further here. I want to talk about, I think it's actually a good time for us to be able to bring out the polling question, because I've been going on here quite quickly. So I actually want to bring up the CPE keyword. So those of you looking for CPE credits, there is rhinoceros, armadillo, elephant, hippopotamus, and manatee. So please give your votes. The quicker you give your votes, I still see about 20–30% of you that haven't voted yet. The quicker I can shut this down and the faster we can move on to the rest of the webinar. So again, rhinoceros, armadillo, elephant, hippopotamus, and manatee. So I'm going to close the poll here in 3, 2, 1. Poll is now closed. I'm not going to show the results. And go into here and talk a little bit about, again, today's talk was really around business strategy. It was on finding and focusing on your niche. There's 3 others that fit within this conversation, which is around organizational design, talking about whether a firm is horizontal or vertical, hybrid, what the implications of that are in terms of production planning, in terms of how you're going to be able to attract and retain talent, how you build redundancy and so forth. Scaling your business and embracing change are interrelated. It's understanding, well, if you're going to scale, what are the different things you have to be aware of? But scaling requires change management in general, and so change management fits within scaling as well. Those 2 articles are coming up pretty soon. If you need to have an intro on Karbon, again, we didn't talk about that. We do that every Tuesday and Thursday. You can go to karbonhq.com/events. All the materials, all of these webinars are going to be on the Firm of the Future site at firmofthefuture.com. Good little plug right here. Again, there's a lot of content that's being up there and being updated. And you definitely need to continue to check back on that, because ultimately it's just a wealth that's going up there. And again, you can just go to firmofthefuture.com to do so. We go into this slide as I go into some questions. But first of all, I just want to say thank you from my side and from the Karbon team. My email is up there at ian@karbonhq.com. So again, if there's any particular questions I don't answer right here, then I can answer them offline as well. So let's take a look at the questions that are up here. One of the questions that came up was somebody wanted the spreadsheet that I was showing, and you can have that spreadsheet. The best way to do that is actually to email me there at ian@karbonhq.com, and I'll invite you into the Google document that I created, and then you just need to go ahead and copy that to a new Google Doc. Otherwise, it comes in after you is going to see what you've done and how you've changed it. Ultimately, please don't use the one that I send to you, but go ahead and copy that and modify it there. The second question that I want to go through here is, these processes seem to apply to established business. What do you want for someone who's just starting out? Yeah, so when you're just starting out, what you ultimately want to do is, regardless of whether or not you have the luxury of being able to go after one particular target, it's always easiest for you to have a person in mind or a set of people in mind of the type of people you want to serve. So for instance, if you were going into value pricing, for instance, and you're just starting that out, it's obviously a lot easier to do that as someone with a new practice than establishing one that you're trying to transition. Whether it be onboarding, whether it be business processes, whether it be marketing or whatnot, you're always best having an idea of who you want to have as your ideal customer. So you don't have the luxury of looking at your existing client base and saying, okay, well, where have we done well with? It's primarily going on to either looking at the general market of small businesses that you can serve. It might be the small businesses in your area, and understanding them as, where is there enough businesses that I can ultimately work with? It's doing that particular SWOT analysis that I talked about. Was, what do I do well? What do I not do well? And how does that intersect with the small business customers that I can serve based on the services I want to provide? So it's also looking at, well, what services do I want to provide? Am I going to be providing bookkeeping, payroll, advisory, tax, whatever it might be? And I need to narrow that down. And based on narrowing it down, it will also narrow the target market collectively that you can serve. And then it's looking at, well, where do I have experience and passion in? Well, maybe, for instance, I love working with nonprofits. That has a very different sort of articulation to it than someone who says, you know, I actually like working with product companies because I'm really good at inventory, and it's something I not only have expertise in, but I have passion. Or it could be, I don't do well in either one of those, but it's interesting because when I look at the people who I talk to on a daily basis, and those people who call me up looking for advice, my friends and my family, they typically seem to be, you know, people who are just starting out or entrepreneurs, people just getting going, and I seem to provide good advice because they thank me for it, and then I'm able to continue on having additional conversations. So you go and look at things that are a little bit non-traditional, but it really goes back to your passion, where you have expertise or experience in prior, what type of customers are going to appreciate that expertise, and ultimately where you're located or where you're putting out your feelers. You know, where is there going to be the highest likelihood for people to actually take that? And regardless of whether or not a customer comes to the door, if you use that to then ultimately determine, here are the processes by which I serve. Here's the way I can have a value conversation. Here's the technology that's ultimately going to help me serve those clients. Here's how an engagement's going to be from start to finish if I use that. Majority of what you create there will be able to be translated into another target audience that might not be directly related to the one that you targeted initially. So all that work is ultimately going to give you dividends in either case. It's just a matter of you want to continue to fine tune and hone it as you go forward in time, so that while you're not bringing everybody in, you can be a bit more selective when you have the opportunity to be more selective, and you're using your marketing and your sales in a directed fashion to drive the pipeline in a more effective manner. So you can't control necessarily who walks in the door, but you can control how you're going to market and how you're getting better effectiveness on the dollars that you spend. So I'm sorry that was a long-winded answer, but I think it's definitely applicable because it is harder for some folks who are just starting out versus those who have more mature practices and are able to go down a more scientific approach than the more qualitative and more gut approach that's out there. So what I want to do now is check to see, okay, see if there's any more questions. Thanks for giving me thanks on that long-winded articulation. At this point, it looks like I've got all the questions answered. Appreciate Andy that's been doing a bunch of the work in the background and answering questions that popped up. Again, I wanted to say thank you from myself, from the Karbon team, from Intuit, from Firm of the Future. Go check out firmofthefuture.com. Got any questions, feel free to email me at ian@karbonhq.com. That's it for the webinar. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day or evening wherever you're at.